why don't you guys take each, I don't know what kind of an audience we have, but if just take maybe 30 seconds and introduce yourselves. Dan, you're a longtime Forbes writer on economics and healthcare. You have an upcoming book called Casino Healthcare, if I have that right.
You do?
Yeah, so just can you do 30 seconds about who you are and how you got interested in this?
Sure. So, a software engineer by training, but that goes back many years, and through the years gravitated through a number of early stage ventures, two of which were in healthcare. So, enterprise software experience that translated into and combined with experience into writing about healthcare, which I've been doing for Forbes for almost 5 years, and other venues as well, with an upcoming book which is titled Casino Healthcare.
Okay, great. Michael?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a bit of a fence jumper. I'm a reformed serial tech entrepreneur, Dan. So I started out, I founded companies outside of healthcare, and I fell backwards. Well, I should say, I started in IT in a little lab looking at metalloproteins, and somebody came in and said, hey, can you set up this computer? And fast forward to the early part of 2011, I ended up working with a company in Geneva that was developing software for mass spec machines. I was on the board and later the chairman. And they had a really neat product. They were selling to 25,000 computational biologists. And I could never figure out, for the life of me in the beginning, why we didn't bother, expanding the scope of that to share the data with others. And I was summarily told, that's not the way we do it here. It's not the right format. So,
right.
Yeah, so I've spent that, since that bit of an epiphany, I've spent the last, almost 6-7 years thinking of how we could, share data ubiquitously in healthcare and life sciences the way that we do it in other industries.
Great, thanks. So the way we structured this is just, instead of making it really back and forth, but just to get the conversation flowing and have this more of a structured debate. We sent out a few questions, and then I'll tweet those as I have a moment while you guys are talking. But let's just start with you, Dan, and I'll go back and forth and give each of you a chance to respond. Assuming we agree that ubiquitous data exchange is critical to the forward progress in medicine, what technologies and/or policies are ideally suited to make this happen in the near term? I mean, obviously we've been through a lot, and there's been a lot of failure to make all this happen. And people are looking to blockchain in some respects to perhaps help solve this. So what if you're hesitant on blockchain? What other avenues do we have?
Well, yeah. So what we're targeting, though, is a systemic problem in the industry, and I've written about it before in the sense of interoperability, and that's really the ultimate issue here. And what we've built and designed, unfortunately, is largely unmanageable. I mean, I even referenced it in an earlier piece as criminal negligence, that we can't share data easily in healthcare. And this goes back to the heart of Dr. Bob Wachter's book, too, which is The Digital Doctor. And one of the quotes out of that that's pivotal in the sense of understanding the systemic challenge is when he quotes Dr. David Brailer, who was the first health IT czar for the country. And when he quoted Dr. Brailer said, we've created the Frankenstein monster he was most afraid of. And that monster is, in effect, EHR systems that don't communicate with each other. And there's over 400 individual software vendors now that manufacture software specifically for the healthcare vertical. And the standards are swirling in the sense of opportunities. Some have referenced FHIR as a great opportunity as an API. Other APIs have come and gone. I remember a day earlier in my career where we talked about XML as a great opportunity to bridge these disparate systems. And so the challenge that we have is what we come down to, and this also represents blockchain, is the need for competing commercial interests to voluntarily agree to a standard or a set of mechanisms to share data ubiquitously. And I don't see that happening in a commercial enterprise way. And I haven't seen it, for example, in any other industry. And I would cite financial services as a great example. The piece that I just wrote on blockchain had a great quote for financial services. And the quote was, how do you get clearinghouses, exchanges, and brokers to agree to a new system that would sweep away the one that is currently generating their profits? You can't do that. So that's the challenge that I see on the road ahead, both in terms of commercial software vendors and the idea of sharing data ubiquitously, which also includes blockchain.
So yeah, Michael, go ahead.
Well, Dan, I think we're 100% lockstep in terms of how we got here. I certainly, and I'll have to say I'm a bit of a newbie to the full life cycle of how EHR vendors manage to get a complete lock on how data is exchanged. But I've seen similar scenarios in other industries, and I'm sure you have too, and that is this idea of sort of the consolidation hurdle. When will we get to consolidation? When will we get competing commercial interests to think about common standards in which to share data? And the answer to that question, based on historical situations, is never. And it's precisely for the reason that you mentioned. It's that if I'm a shareholder in any of those companies that holds that commercial data as IP, I have zero interest in, or stakeholder in sharing that. I mean, it sounds good from a marketing perspective, but in reality, it doesn't work. So if you take that sort of non sequitur into account, that you will, there is no historical precedent for consolidation of data, be it healthcare or otherwise. What you look to then is, where did it work? Where did we get to the point where, where we are now, where I can open up almost any branded PC with almost any type of operating system on it, or a mobile device, and I can access documents. I mean, that's what the world we live in right now. It's document based. I can access and read documents from anywhere in the world, from any system, from any vendor. How did we get there? And really, we got there because it was a consumer-based push. Consumers drove that initiative. And so if you take that thinking into healthcare, and there's been quite a bit thought about and written about patients owning their data and so on and so forth, and I think we could probably talk about that a little later. But if you take that into healthcare and you take it to its logical conclusion, and you say, how can we create an institute, how can we create a model whereby consumers are able to push for this sharing of information? How does that actually happen? And it doesn't happen with a centralized model. I agree it's very difficult. Rockefeller said, it's difficult to do good and well at the same time. And my Healthbank initiative has been thinking about that for the last 4 years. But when you look at blockchain and its distributed methodology of exchanging data, and not looking at this idea of having to convince large data silos to do the right thing, that's where I think you see a real light at the end of the tunnel. Now, the implementation of blockchain, I think we can all agree that that's going to require some clever thinking, but it's consumer focused versus trying to get the vested interest to move forward. I think we see there's an opportunity there, and it's really built around for the marketing piece, it's not technology as much as technology has been a key focus of my professional life. It's about the simple word around trust.
Yeah, and one of my big pushes for this. I mean, we saw in the Precision Medicine Initiative a couple of weeks ago that there seems to be a growing consensus that you can't have real precision medicine, and I don't mean just genomics. I mean social determinants of health. Creating a more complete picture around the individual without a more individual-centric system. And to your point, Dan, it seems like you can't rely on institutions to really create this individual-centric system. Which leads to the next question, and this will start out with you this time, Michael. How should institutional conflicts of interest be managed in personalized medicine?
Right. So the institutional conflict of interest is driven by the institutional bias. And in order to get rid of those conflicts of interest at the institutional layer, we need to move farther down the chain of custody of that data. Again, going back to the entities that created the data, and those are the people themselves. That's I think one of the key bits around some of the ideas that are sort of sprouting up on the consumer side with ResearchKit and CareKit is we really should think less about how does the institution share data and think more about how does the entity that's generating the data, how do they share it? And we circumvent a lot of that built-in bias, and it's not something that you're going to roll out tomorrow, and all of a sudden, universally, we're all set. But it certainly has the capacity, particularly if we educate consumers and give them a clear picture on what the value proposition is. It has the capacity to take off and be something that's fairly ubiquitous in the next 7 to 10 years. I mean, you can look at non-healthcare organizations that have successfully done this that were paradigm change. It was a completely new paradigm. Facebook 12 years ago. That's a system where people said, I'd like to know what other people are doing, and the value proposition is so great, I'm going to share my data. We need to think less about sort of the existing technology. We need to revamp the whole thing and think more about how can we create value for the consumers? How can we create value? How can consumers, both those suffering from chronic illness and those thinking they don't want to suffer from chronic illness, how can we create some easy value propositions for that? And it certainly isn't, gee, go input your data into a static system that doesn't, let's say, belong to you.
Dan?
Yeah, so I looked at the question, and I think the only change that I'd make is simply the idea of an institutional conflict versus what it really is. It's not an institutional conflict. It's a commercial conflict. I mean, the systems that we have, and that's the key point that I make in the book, the systems that we have in healthcare today, at least here in the U.S. and certainly other industrialized countries, are largely based on and fundamentally optimized for revenue and profits, not safety and quality. And so we haven't really made that shift. We're trying to, and we're looking at ways in which that might happen. But those institutional conflicts are really commercial. Let's call them what they are, which is commercial revenue conflicts that are hard to mitigate. And I think one of the examples that I've cited previously, and it's a good one, it's dated, but it does work in the sense of an analogy, is, in the 50s, the major auto manufacturers were all creating their own vehicle identification numbers, and it was a mess. You couldn't track a car nationally. You didn't know how or where a car was stolen and how to track that. If a manufacturer was creating lemons, You didn't know how to, notify consumers that their vehicle might be a lemon. So there were these safety issues associated with vehicle manufacturing, and so the government stepped in and in effect mandated the use of what we have today, which is a vehicle identification number that works throughout the whole system. Every manufacturer has signed on board and in fact is required to for safety reasons. And we need to bring that kind of thinking into healthcare. We haven't done that yet.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things people are thinking about with blockchain-related technologies is that, when you have a wallet, it's even a more secure wallet and a more secure ID than you would have with something like a vehicle identification number. Because you can have the same wallet with, an almost infinite number of IDs that are still related back to the individual. That could be one of the elements there. So let me go back to you, Michael. How should we tie data ownership, data exchange, and financial incentives? I think it's something maybe you didn't touch on, or you can speak a good lead into it in the follow-up, Dan, is, if the financial, there's not a really good way, other than what I've seen via smart contracts in Bitcoin, to tie financial incentives to data ownership and exchange. But actually, let's go to you first, Dan, on that, and we'll go back to Michael.
Yeah, so that's part of the challenge that I have with blockchain. Look, blockchain is a great technology. It really solves a hard problem that's existed for as long as we've had, digital life. But the one problem that it solves that is unique to blockchain is really this idea of double spending, which only applies to cryptocurrencies. We can create smart contracts outside of blockchain. We have the technology to do that. We can stitch together distributed databases. We can stitch together encryption, industrial strength encryption, and we have timestamp server technology that can ensure the record keeping for a ledger-based system that's independent of blockchain. So my only argument is that we don't need blockchain for smart contracts. Yes, you could use blockchain for that, but you can also use existing robust, low-cost, well-tested technologies to build all of those solutions. So the challenge isn't in the technology. The challenge is in the agreements between competing commercial interests that we need to get to make that happen. And that's the larger challenge I see for the whole healthcare industry.
Michael?
Well, so I wouldn't say that the issue is certainly
I think we're losing Michael's audio.
per se. We definitely. Hello?
Go ahead and just start over, Michael.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that seems better.
Yeah. So, Dan, I agree. It's not a technology issue. However, it is a process. It is a methodology that lends itself to the way that blockchain operates, unlike some of the other existing legacy technologies. I mean, I think, in essence, double spending and the idea around double spending, that concept is a proxy for trust, getting back to my original piece. And blockchain also offers a much broader shift in thinking around how health data and life sciences data is communicated back and forth, because right now, the way that we communicate, for the most part, is document-based. And that lends itself to how the technology itself has sort of evolved. You go out on the internet, you see a document, your browser, whatever brand you happen to be using, parses through that document, reads it. We're a very document-based society in terms of how we get information, which is unusual because the internet and data really started much more of a database perspective. Blockchain it moves beyond what is a very clunky document-based system, and moves us back into a more database-centric system, whereby we have the ability. Again, it's about having the ability enabled by technology, not the new fancy, interesting technology making the argument. It's just happens to be we have the right tool now finally, but it's putting in place these systems whereby we can plug in to existing groups and entities that would like to be able to exchange data, see a value proposition behind an immediate value proposition, and that is where I think the Holy Grail is at in terms of how we're going to get there.
Yeah, I think, well, I'll certainly agree. I think that one thing that's a big part of that, the reason Bitcoin started, and maybe Bitcoin was not, it was the first use case, but maybe not the best use case. But it's the deinstitutionalization of a system, and there's probably going to be a lot of variants on how to do that and develop trust that's not dependent on a third party. And I think we're really just at the beginning of this. Any final comments? We've had about 4 minutes left. Dan, Michael, any other things you want to get out there?
Well, first of all, Dan, thanks for joining us and debating on this really important topic. I think blockchain as a technology has a bit of a black eye going from a marketing perspective because of Bitcoin. I'd love to do a piece together where we talk about the reality of what blockchain brings to a system that employs trust and is more individual centric. So thanks a lot again for joining me and talking about this.
Absolutely, and welcome the chance to do it in other capacities as well. I follow the technology closely, and that's obviously what also prompted me to write the piece that I wrote, was largely because of Mike Hearn's comments in January. As a lead developer, I think that's the way you can categorize Mike's involvement. As a lead developer for Bitcoin, I mean, for him to come out in January and basically call it a failure, I think was an important milestone, not even in the sense of Bitcoin, but in the sense of blockchain generally. Why did it fail? It failed because it couldn't get to consensus among competing interests within the community. And so my concern is that if that's what caused Bitcoin to fail, is the reliance on a consensus between competing interests, we're going to have a real hard time with that in healthcare. And I think that's my only real argument. Yeah,
I don't want this conversation to be about Bitcoin per se.
Right.
I'll leave that to Reddit to debate whether Bitcoin's a failure or not. I think I a lot of opinions on both sides of that, but even if one of the core developers calls it such, my own personal take is it's going to evolve a lot, but the price is holding steady, and there might be a split, there will be an evolution, but something like it will continue even if Bitcoin doesn't.
Absolutely, and I think I referenced Ethereum, which is the next sort of generation, and we'll see subsequent generations as well. And I think the principle of getting away from cryptocurrency and the principle of getting to smart contracts is very interesting, and I think that will expand. But then again, too, the question begs, do we need blockchain to do smart contracts? And that's where the answer is maybe and maybe not.
Yeah, well, some sort of distributed trust mechanism.
Exactly.
That's the key. Is while we're deciding what the future looks like, we should always keep in mind what didn't work in the past. And I certainly I don't think that layering on a bunch of technology has never been a successful endeavor unless you've got the right framework to go with it. So yeah, that's key.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. We're just about at the bottom of the hour, but look forward to continuing this conversation in the future. I think it's only going to grow.
Absolutely. Welcome to Chance.
Thanks again, Dan. Thanks, Leonard.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.